Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important because we will discuss on real-time supply chains management issues. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Raymond, Mr. Adam. So thank you, and I'm very happy that already, especially from Asia Pacific, many organizations they are thinking about World Talent Economy Forums, and I'm very happy how actually our speakers contributing for World Talent Economy Forum. Yes, we have one of the largest summit with Rwanda. Beside that, we have another plans with all of the Muslim worlds, like all of the Muslim countries. Then we have planned with India. So yes, we have some good news, and hopefully we can achieve some good objective with the help of all of the speakers, those who join World Talent Economy Forum, because your experience is priceless. And when I see the feedback from our audience, they are really big fan of our open dialogue. Many government right now, they are big fan of our open dialogues. They really like how our speakers contributing. They really like how our speakers actually share their experience, motivate our audience. And that's why we have to move with these academic activities. Already, yes, we start with 600 students from Rwanda, so all of them actually women. One of my PhD actually on glass ceiling factors. So I am very much happy that with all of our speaker we can contribute for women development. Beside that, from Malaysia, from India, from Bangladesh, we are getting more students, those who love to learn under the banner of School of Talent Economy. And I'm sure how our students will learn from example, Mr. Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall, even Mr. Raymond. I believe even Adam will help all of our team. I'm sure it will be very valuable things. So thank you for all of your support. I directly want to go for the discussions for today. So Professor David Smith, how you want to analyze to this topic?
Sharif, thank you. Supply chain visibility uh, or simple real-time visibility is really posed with all the conditions going on in the world today to become one of the most transformational and disruptive technologies in the global supply chain business. Uh, and we've seen the impacts, particularly as COVID has begun to hit this and how it's going. So what is it? Supply chain visibility is the ability to locate a specific product's position as it moves through the supply chain, which means you have really full sight and awareness of your product's status from the start to the finish in real time. And real time is becoming really important today as you look at these, because as we see the growth of Internet of Things devices, of trackers, of cloud monitoring, the fact that the digital universe is becoming really global, and I can track in real time in the middle of an ocean or in the middle of other places has really stepped this up a notch and what we can do and what can be done with it. But to kind of set it back in some boundaries, though, if you look at this whole supply chain management market, uh, that in 2020, it had a market size of about $23 billion. And in 2026, this is expected to grow to around $50 billion at a compound annual growth rate of about 10%. And it's very interesting because the COVID impact has shown that the supply chain visibility is one of the critical challenges we're facing today. We're seeing it with, for example, here in North America, with hundreds of cargo ships lined up off of the West Coast here, of cargo ships lined up all around the world, of the inability to get supplies. The chip shortages are part of the supply chain logistics that we're seeing really messed up today. And in 50 years ago, we wouldn't know how bad of a shape we were in today because we simply did not have the tools the software, the sensors, the tracking tools, and the real-time communications to make a difference. You know, I'm a bad consumer of this. When I ordered something, I wanted to track it from the time I placed my order to see when it was actually shipped, where it was coming here, and stuff like that. And I set up real-time alerts every part of the way along so I'll know where it is. So I'm adding to this whole real-time supply chain uh, visibility as a consumer. But think of me as a company to know where the pieces are coming in so that I can uh, manufacture on time. You know, one of the things I want to do today is minimize my inventory so that I can keep my costs down of my manufacturing, of my production. Same thing if I'm on the other side where I'm bringing in goods, for example, to uh, build an electric truck manufacturing plant. I want to minimize my supply chain logistics so that I can be more productive and do just in time deliveries. Well, just in time is really hard to do today with all these disruptions to the system. And that's why it's becoming even more important is we've gotten used in the past to doing things like just in time manufacturing, just in time delivery, just in time getting our medicine delivered to us through the supply chain. And that is disrupted even at the consumer level as well as the company level as well. So to me, it's a very important issue going forward, and it is a fairly large market, and one that as we bring in on more sensors, more Internet of Things, as we push our cloud computing environment closer to edge of cloud computing, they're all going to contribute to innovations that are ripe for this very important industry. You're muted.
Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, David. That was it's a good introduction to the supply chain issues. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. I'll speak to the practicality of what we do. As I've said in other forums, our mission is climate restoration and climate repair. In that regard, for us, supply is no longer waste is no longer a waste product that goes into a landfill or into the ground or gets burned and creates more pollution. What we do is we take waste and we convert it into environmental products that actually continue to help reduce environmental impacts, such as cleaning up water, soil amendments, animal husbandry, char, feed to reduce zoonotic diseases in livestock, etc. So how does the supply chain work for us? The supply chain works for us in obviously in not just the raw materials, which is the waste, which are we have joint ventures with waste haulers or waste handlers or landfill operators. So those people already have the material handling equipment. But what we bring to the table are like what David described: the sensors and the capabilities to measure what is going into our systems. We use predominantly pyrolysis as our processing capability, and we typically process about 120 metric tons a day of waste and convert that into different things, such as an element known as biochar in the world. Also, we call it elemental char, and then we formulate it, and that has to be measured. And so it's an ongoing supply chain for us. It is real time. What we do is we use blockchain technology that we've integrated to keep track of the material coming in, but we also use blockchain on the back end to measure what is the char that's coming out, what is the quality of the char, because depending on the feed char, you get a 30% carbon char depending on how it's manufactured, and there's a lot of variables in that mix. So we're using artificial intelligence as well as virtual reality and AR to complement our supply chain and measure the everything from the automatic supply of the so-called waste, which no longer is waste for us, but our feedstock, and that's what we call it. We measure the feedstock going in, we keep track of it, we make sure that nothing is being diverted, and all the way to the end user. So there's a whole channel of distribution that we're creating, everything from rail to sometimes truck, but we try to keep that low because of the carbon footprint, and the means of formulating the material into the final product that we're moving on to the channel. So that's basically our practical application. So hopefully that gives somebody a window into a business-to-business approach to supply chain management. We're not retail, so I just thought that might hopefully be a good visual concept. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Raymond, what you want to add for this supply chain discussion?
Good morning, everybody. What we're seeing here in Argentina at the moment, we're running a 3% monthly inflation. The effects of the pandemic have are quite different here with regards to the visibility and the effects, but with regards to the supply chain, the employment issue, the employment part, or the P2P part of the chain is showing some effects here. I know certain businesses and business owners that are struggling to find people to take on board roles which have traditionally been sort of easily filled. I think people have had a lot of time on their hands to be able to rethink their part, the part that they play within the supply chain, and so this is the getting the products to market is certainly part and parcel of it. I mean, we do have a lot of containers in the docks at the moment, and the processing of the materials as they come into the country is one thing, but certainly the other end of the supply chain, certainly in service industries, there's like major bottlenecks I see happening, not just along our waterfront with all the containers, but a lot of businesses having been closed, and the ones that are open are being unable to find people to fill these positions. Really interesting moment in time, and I think it's sort of glaringly obvious, or it makes glaringly obvious the fact that a lot of our systems and processes have been obsolete or outdated for some time, and it's really urgent that we address the restructuring and rethinking these processes.
Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Oh, thank you, Sharif. So one thing that immediately came to mind when I first read the topic for today's episode and discussion was the colossal backlog of cargo ships out at sea, which is something I never saw before on that scale, certainly. And there are rumors and murmurings of supply chains and industries being doctored to help tip the scales to meet the nefarious goals of those involved in politics so that political leverages and favors are met. So yes, the cargo backlog was something of a black swan, and of course the Evergreen vessel and the incident involving that getting stuck in the Suez Canal set a bit of a precedent for what was to come shortly after that. And there were and still are murmurings of famines and food shortages to come as we go further into this decade. And even if some of the more outlandish rumors do not have the evidence to back up such claims, nevertheless, ordinary people's trust in authorities, governments, leaderships has been very badly compromised. So to gain back even just a little bit of that former trust, veils shielding the processes involved in such processes should be lifted so that more people can scrutinize it. And the public should be shown the courtesy of knowing there are safeguards put in place against corruption and doctoring and spin. However, people's trust in governing bodies and authoritative bodies has been compromised over and over and over again, going back to Rome and some of the mad emperors they have, and all the rebellions and uprisings throughout history. So it's part of the cycles that we don't seem to learn from, where leaderships and industries and supply chains promise to do what previous generations did not, only to be corrupted all over again, brought down, and repeat. So if we are to learn from history, then we as humans should have learned our lessons millennia ago. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Martley.
Yes, glad to join y'all. Glad to join this discussion and everything. Hear that it's about supply chain, and a couple of things have come up in that regards here in Durham, North Carolina. I know that I've been talking to friends of mine, some that are pet owners, and surprisingly, they're having a hard time finding their pet food because in some cases it might be because the cats and dogs are finicky, and in some cases it's because the actual product isn't in the store. And the same thing with Gatorade, which is something that I've heard some people looking for, and they're not being able to find that as well. And then, of course, there's been some cases of some folks going to their local restaurant and wanting to get a very common staple, that being French fries. And the potatoes were out and all of that. So it is definitely impacting people's daily lives on a regular basis. And definitely folks are trying to figure out what this all means, maybe even in this, those previous speakers spoke about in the geopolitical sense of the economy and everything. Because if we can remember, there was a time that a lot of these things that I just referred to were done on a local level. But that is not the case now as much at this day and time, and a lot of it is people trying to get stuff from other parts of the country. Here in the United States, I'm over here in Durham, North Carolina, like I said, or from other parts of the world. So definitely am a big fan of the global economy, but I'm also a fan of buying local and supporting local merchants as well. So that's something that even came up recently in, as I mentioned to you last week, that we were doing here in Durham, a Black business exposition and things of that nature. So it's a lot of the African American business leaders. And yes, the supply chain conversation did come up in that conference, as well as folks were trying to figure out how this plays into the whole economic divide that exists in our society, and ways that it can, as we realign the supply chain, can actually help to improve that situation. So on that note, that's where I'll land my plane and hear what the other folks have to say as well.
Thank you, Mr. Martley. Professor David Smith, I have to learn more. Even I believe our audience has to learn more, because in developing world, in COVID-19 situation, because they have many dependency with developed nations. And beside that, in this COVID-19 situation, supply chain heavily affected. That's why the business and other things cannot run smoothly. Example, next week, I believe, yes, next week we have a dialogue with Rwanda governments. So when we discuss about public-private partnership, even different projects, this kind of projects actually heavily interrupted because of supply chain issues. So what type of strategy the company has to take right now, especially in the construction industry? Unmute, please.
You're on mute, David.
That is a great question, because there's a movement more towards local now. And the situation's pretty interesting. Sharif, the link that's in the chat, if you would bring that up, that is a great example of what real-time supply chain visibility is. And that is one of the many services, but that is looking at the marine traffic that's in real-time use around the world today. So it's all those cargo ships that the others have spoken about as we're going through. And I'm going to put another one in there that is just the cargo ship trackers as we're going in there. But that in the back time, you're actually, if you sit there, you're going to see those moving as you would sit there and look at it on your computer. So you can see that there's a lot of ships moving, a lot of cargo all around the world. And many of those, as you can see, are clustered around ports. If you look on around China, the Malaysia area, you see clustering. You come over to the United States and you see a ton of clustering. And what's interesting in the United States is on this type of map, and you can actually click on each one and get more detail about it too. That's part of what real-time supply logistics are, is being able to see where they are in real time, go get detailed information about them in real time, and be able to act upon that. And the company that does this is actually a real interesting little company on this particular one. Uh, but what's also interesting is the clustering there. Uh, Look at Africa and look at the clustering around the ports on the west side of Africa. Look up around not just the west coast of the United States, which we hear a lot about, but look into the Gulf of Mexico with the clustering there. And you begin to see them in other places, and it really helps you understand the global nature of real-time supply chain visibility and how it can be used and how you can put it in the various things to be effective with it. If you look at this as a great example, there is one of the drivers in this area is a demand for greater visibility and transparency in the supply chain data and processes. The ability to see things in real time, to have the sensors. You see, as Sharif is going over that, oftentimes it says the data is received by satellite. And so it's coming back no matter where you are in the world, you can have visibility into it. As I said before, as you begin to look at technologies like the Internet of Things and improved sensors, machine learning, artificial intelligence, the back office and being pushed out further, the cloud going to the edge of cloud for processing. But there's still some really big restraints on this too. There's growing security and privacy concerns. If I want to become a smart pirate instead of a dumb pirate, I could use the app that we've been showing and go and see which are the ships I want to do things with. And what are the other things? And on the other hand, there's tons and tons of opportunities in this area. The ability to take and integrate this down to the company level, down to a government planning level, to be able to put in effect more artificial intelligence, more abilities to say not just where it is, but what do I do now? What are the other elements I have to do to be successful? Or the places there's tons of opportunities in this area, and I can do the same thing like we saw for the ships. I can do the same thing for trucks moving across the country. I can do it for long haul trucks. I can do it for local deliveries. I can use all the cameras we're beginning to see as part of a way to manage my real-time supply chain visibility. So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of ways to do it. But it's those. And am I advocating for bringing back piracy? No, but the ability to look and use it in many different ways. The screen we just saw earlier is a great place for me to do competitive analysis if I'm a company entering with new products and trying to ship globally. So again, a lot of different ways to use this data. And data is king. In real-time supply chain visibility is a voracious user of data. And data is what makes this all possible.
Can I ask you a
Thank
quick
you.
question?
Yes. Yes, sure.
Thanks. And it was actually something I was thinking about as we were talking about supply chain and everything else. One of the other things that we've been seeing with all of this supply chain conversation is a lot of strikes around the country. And I'm wondering, and I'm not just here in the United States, but around the world. And I'm wondering how much this supply chain conversation is playing into these discussions. I mean, the UAW, which is the United Auto Workers, I believe they're still on strike, or at least are threatening that idea. The folks at Tractor are, and there are a number of other strikes here in the United States and even globally. I understand the London Underground, which is, of course, their subway system, has a November walkout date. And definitely the Pakistan petroleum dealers have announced a nationwide strike on November 25th. So I'm thinking that a lot of this is being played into the discussion around the supply chain and kind of these workers' rights that play into that as well. Am I correct in that assumption?
Mr.
Anybody?
David is speaking.
Well,
Okay.
I think you're right in that human nature says where I see opportunities where there's pressure points, let me try to take advantage of it. And I think that's part of what you're seeing. Plus, you're seeing there is a global shift in the whole way we are looking at management, the whole way we're looking at logistics, and the whole way we're valuing the people. COVID caused not only a great resignation from people and companies, it's causing us to look and redo how we look at things. Um, the United Auto Workers are there because factories got shut down because of COVID. And that changed the dynamics of their pay structure, of their lifestyle. You go over in the examples, a couple of the other examples you used, they were hurting because people were not using the tubes during COVID
Right.
because the country was shut down. So this is a natural reaction, but it's one that I personally think is misguided because we're going to be getting back to business. And if they're pushing the cost up so far that you cannot afford to do what you're doing, they are eventually going to be hurt more than their health, is my personal opinion.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, I just want to bring some practical experience because you have a business in waste management industries. And I just want to share some of the experience from developing world. I can remember 3 years before when I directly go to a waste management place, I find traditionally, like developing nations, they have many people, many unemployed peoples. Even every place they have a lot of people actually employed. So when it's a project for waste management, there are many people actually engaged to like distribute this waste and managing this waste. I can remember 3,000 people. It's been 3,000 family dependent on these waste management issues. But my question is that, example, when your corporations managing this kind of supply chain, so how does it work? Second things, what I can remember, like even in the practical world, politicians has a lot of pressures that if they go for automations, let's say this 3,000 people, it's been 3,000 family, they become unemployed. When they become unemployed, it will be big economical challenge as well. How your company actually manage supply chain issues in that situations? How does it work, or what is your advice for developing world?
Well, I think those are excellent topics and questions. And I'm going to kind of take the tack that Mark Lee approach came with. Our business is what we call a triple bottom line company. That was created back in the 1990s by a professor out of Purdue University. I have pandemic amnesia, so I don't remember his name. But basically, his concept was that you have to get a decent return on investment for your shareholders, your bondholders, your stakeholders. Back in the 90s, there was a trend towards making employees part of the stakeholder environment, giving them shares and things like that. Didn't quite work out because of an artificial approach to economics, which I think is misguided. Our current economic system, including supply chain management, is based on a premise. The premise is scarcity. And you can see that here in the United States, which is going to shock a lot of people in the developing world, that 40% of the food that's grown in the United States is thrown out. That is a staggering statistic. And when you think about that, that means there are people in the United States, in a first world country, in which people are going hungry. Their children are suffering. There's increase in exposure to disease and healthcare issues, and people end up going to emergency rooms in hospitals because they don't have the coverage. Now that's beginning to change, hopefully, but by the same token, it hasn't fully changed. So we have to be cognizant of that. Our approach has been to try to rectify it where we can. We can only do what we can't do. We're not the government. We're not going to make government decisions. But what we can do is we can take what we call challenges and convert those challenges into opportunities. And the way we do it, especially related to the supply chain management issue, is the good news is we form joint ventures. Our joint ventures are waste management companies or waste haulers or people that have so much waste they're burying it or burning it and causing more harm to society than otherwise would be the case if they weren't in that business. So we've targeted those people. Not everybody's a fit, but those who are a fit share the same value structure that we bring of a triple bottom line. And the other component of the triple bottom line, besides the return on investment, is obviously a quantitative approach to reducing environmental impacts. We improve soil health, we improve air quality, we improve water. Those are all the issues that we're striving to target. And we don't want to become Alphabet. We're not trying to become a unicorn. So I can, as a whim, I can send up a rocket and have fun, going to outer space. I'd rather deal with people's issues here on the ground on planet Earth, and apply what we can to help those people achieve the third goal of the triple bottom line, which is social impacts. How do you improve social impacts? The original concept by this professor out of Purdue was you pay people a living wage. You don't pay them minimum wage. And right now in the United States, not the developing world, talking about the United States, minimum wage is not $15 an hour. It is in some states, but nationally it's $7 and change. Nobody can live on that in the United States. I'm telling you that. That's why we have a disparity. This false premise of economics, of scarcity, has created this dichotomy. So we're addressing it using a different economic model, which is called sacred economics. There's a book called that. You can read it. And that's just a jumping off point where you actually create value to people. You pay them not just a living wage, but you also ensure that there are facilities for healthcare where needed, and that you actually cover their education. The better the educational outcomes of people, the better society benefits. In the beginning, because we're in the business of turning waste into lowering environmental impacts, in other words, climate restoration, climate repair, what we did is we said, oh, well, we need a manager in forestry, so we're going to pay for his forestry management degree, or we're going to need a civil engineer. We'll pay a civil engineering degree, which we would do. But we woke up one day and realized it doesn't matter what they want to learn, just as long as they go to school. If they want to learn English literature, or they want to learn, horticulture, it doesn't matter. Whatever they want to learn, let them learn. Let them make the decision. We're not here to dictate to people. We're here to improve their lives. And the only way that can happen is if you take a premise of this triple bottom line and we apply it to the supply chain management. So how does that work? Very simple. When you have waste, which your local partner has plenty of it, and you convert it into product, then the question is, how do you get that to market? And what markets do you serve? That is a very complex situation. And as I said in my opening remarks, we use a lot of technology, but we also use brain power, human power. It's not to displace the humanity. It's for the benefit of humanity. So we take a balanced approach. There are trade-offs. We might not make as much profit as somebody else would if they thought only about profit. But again, to us, the profit is the social impact improvement for people and their lives, so they can put their kids through college, pay a decent wage, get paid a decent wage, retire decently, and live a quality life. So it's a quality of life mission to us, impacts the supply chain management. And I just want to add one more thing, and I'll be done. And that is, everybody's talked about COVID and how it impacted the supply chain management. And I think Mr. Adams gave an excellent report that he's never seen this in his lifetime. I don't think since World War II we've seen such supply chain management disruption. And it was in World War II. I wasn't alive, but I'm a Korean War child. I was born during the Korean Wars. But the point is my parents were, and they told us about the supply chain management issues. So I'm saying what needs to be done with supply chain management is a greater good. You have to look at the supply chain management and you have to balance it out. It has to be, it's not all or nothing. It's not creating a false dichotomy. It's creating a balanced issue. At that point, I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Raymond.
Yeah, we've been, with my bike tourism company, we've been sort of more purpose focused over the last 5-6 years, and a lot of that is part of becoming or striving to become a triple impact business. So we triple impact with regards to sustainable, being a sustainable tourist agency. Obviously, even though we have a good purpose and our core values are along the lines of diversity taking place, being environmentally aware, supporting our local producers. We have our recycling nature within the culture of the company, and obviously Buena Onda, because we're on bikes all day, so we're sort of putting a positive vibe out onto a very, very, very busy car-focused or car-centric city. There's big changes for us because with the supply chain, obviously we have all our core clients are coming from overseas, so they're taking planes to get here, sometimes cruise ships. So there's a huge factor with regards to carbon emissions. So I'm thinking the supply chain is going to be factoring more and more ways in which companies can sort of be more positive in the approach to negating these carbon emissions, which has caused a whole lot of problems for us, I think, or is certainly not helping with regards to climate change. The other company that I'm involved with, it's on the complete other spectrum, and they are mining precious metals and jewels and so on and so forth. So their supply chain issues are obviously a lot to do with freight and shipping costs, insurance costs, and so on and so forth. And they are also looking at ways in reducing the impact within the supply chain using blockchain technology. So using QR codes and blockchain technology for people to be able to pick up in their own country products which they've purchased from the company in a different country. So they're purchasing the same product, but without having all the freight and shipping costs and security issues with regards to piracy and sovereignty issues being affecting them along the way. That was my little ramble.
Thank you. Mr. Adam. Mr. Adam. Adam, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I think there is some internet issues. Mr. Markley.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing about people's thoughts around blockchain and things of that nature. I was actually hearing what Marshall was saying about his company, and I'm glad to see that he's definitely taking that climate positivity kind of attitude, because I know that here in North Carolina, we were actually one of the places that was a reason that there is things called climate justice and things along that line, or environmental justice, because of things that happened that were opposite of that in the climate change kind of situations or supply chain situations of the past, when people would literally dump things into poor neighborhoods intentionally and things along that line. And that's why Ben Chavis and others kind of coined that phrase of environmental justice. So definitely, I'm glad to see, Marshall, that your company is doing work that is more of a progressive and positive way and the social impact and all of that. So that's, like I said, totally opposite of the way that other folks have done it. As I've mentioned to Sharif before, I'm definitely in the field not only of media but of in entertainment, and having musician friends and friends in all aspects of the entertainment industry. One of the ways that we're seeing the supply chain impact us is the elimination of the so-called middleman. And a lot of people are liking what is happening in that regards, because a lot of people on the arts are getting interested in NFTs, in Bitcoins, in cryptocurrencies, and in a number of other things, even the metaverse, because they feel that it is a way to go directly from them, definitely the supplier, to the consumer, and not have to have agents and even in some cases venues and other things along those lines. So it's a way that they can actually I won't say eliminate those folks, because in some ways I've been involved in those jobs, but at least make them less of a necessity, and it becoming more of a direct to consumer kind of approach. So that is a positive thing that we're seeing in the supply chain kind of conversations going on in the art world and in the creative world. But even people there, one of the problems that I'm seeing is that folks don't quite um, have a total understanding of what supply chain means, or even how it works in the sense of cryptocurrency and the blockchain technology. It all sounds good in theory. It all sounds good in the notion of it happening, and the notion of it being a success, and it creating that direct from a supplier to consumer kind of relationship. I'm imagining that even other industries like the automobile industry and the trucking industry and our food industries are thinking similar kind of thoughts. But whether that is going to be a true reality and what that reality will be to our overall economy, that's one of the questions that I have that I still don't have answers to. But if anybody else on the panels have got any ideas or ways that I can clarify it to some of those common folks that I talk to, I would love to hear it, and things along those lines, because I hear it as a wonderful theory, but whether it can actually be enacted in a way that will be positive, that's the question that I have. And I'll land the plane there.
Thank you. Mr. Adam.
Sorry about that. The connection just suddenly disappeared. Just expanding on some previous points we mentioned, especially about learning from history and how economies, supply chains, industries were frequently manipulated to help meet certain geopolitical ends. So the most dramatic examples of that being the Holodomor in Soviet Ukraine, the Great Chinese Famine under the leadership of Chairman Mao, of course, and others. And these were able to happen, at least in part, through manipulation and deception, which are the opposite of visibility and transparency, obviously. However, having said that, I do think enabling visibility and transparency could only just be half of the solution. What I mean is, would a significant portion of the public even be able to know what to do with the information and data presented to them, courtesy of increased visibility and transparency? There is quite a well-known trope within the more murkier strata of the banking classes, where they refit financial systems into greater and greater levels of complexity, so that ordinary people would be less able to understand it all, even if the system was explained to them, kind of like a hall of mirrors, really. And I also appreciated the point that Mr. Mark Lee mentioned about local produce. So we have touched upon large-scale trade and high finance, but of course, it's important not to neglect the more provincial and local types of trade. I know here in England, and probably all of Great Britain as a whole, people want to know where their food has come from, how long it took to be transported from A to B, and so on. Is it organic or not? Is it gluten-free or not? Who picked it? I remember on various packets for various items, the boxes or cartons would have the name and the picture of the person who picked it, say blueberries, and the farm it came from too, of course. But of course, there is the danger of falling into the illusion that supply chain visibility and transparency, where a corporation or company just outright lies, which has happened. So how can the public hold these companies and corporations to account? Well, the probably can't. Too big to fail, as they say. So if a company pledges to do this or promises to do that, well, what are the promises made by big conglomerates worth to ordinary people? Probably not that much. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really, really great discussion, especially with the practical application. I can remember 14 years before I do a practical projects in my countries on supply chain management. And I can remember it's a billions dollar lost in agriculture sector because we do not have a very good supply chain system. So I believe that not only Bangladesh, many developing countries, especially, they are struggling with the supply chain issues. Farmer do not get enough price only because of bad supply chain issues. On the other hand, other producers in the grassroots level, they also do not get enough price for all their products uh, uh, because they do not have enough supply chain system. So I believe that Mr. Marshall's, how you analyze, even Professor David Smith and all of our speakers actually analyze, they will get a proper solutions for managing the supply chain. Even after 14 years, last years when we started World Talent Economy Forum, we were start work with Nepal, India's, Bangladesh, this kind of country. Still we find supply chain is a big problem. So I believe that practically, if we can find a better solution for developing world, we can save millions of peoples, and this is definitely billions of dollars actually they are losing because lack of supply chain. So there are many problems developing world has. That's why always I welcome developed world peoples, industry peoples, academicians, politicians, startup peoples, because you have fantastic solutions. So I believe if the developing worlds they can follow our show, they can attend in our shows, and they can get some specific guideline for their personal business, even small media for their small medium enterprise, even in the grassroots level business, it will be really helpful. uh, but trust me, I believe that there are many people still we need to do a proper help, we need to develop a proper strategy. Yes, there are many big companies, they are coming, they are joining in the developing nations, but I believe still there are room, still we have to do a lot of work. So I request all of our scholars, those who join regularly for our show, we are actually taking an initiative in School of Talent Economy. First batch, we will train 600 entrepreneurs. So your experience actually priceless. Your experience, how you get knowledge, how you get experience. For some reason, many countries, it's very valuable. That's why we are always focused on small country. For example, Malaysia is not so big, Rwanda is not so big, Bangladesh is not so big. This kind of small country, we believe there are a lot of problem, and we can solve many problems. So we need support for our academic initiative. It will be real academy with industrial experience, because from the day one we want that our students and our peoples, they can produce something. Even example, we can do a research and solution for supply chain, and I believe this will be pure economical benefit for developing world. That's why I always say, do not only provide fund, help them uh, develop them some strategy, or help them to solve the problem. This is the way actually solve the real world problem. Otherwise, developing, I know developed nations through NGO, they are investing billions of dollars. It will not be helpful. Example, in Bangladesh, I saw largest NGO they have, but when we discuss about poverty reduction, still they have to do a lot of work. And I believe real entrepreneurship actually help them. So that's why Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Raymonds, Mr. Markley, Mr. Adams, all of our speakers is extremely valuable for developing worlds. And I'm sure you have a lot of interesting idea, not only idea, you are actually from industry, so you have a lot of solution. And with your solution, if you train the people that how they can solve the problem, it will be more benefit. Do not put money on theirs, just put your experience, which will be more valuable. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, I'd wanted to say with your excellent comments there that the other thing that we have to consider is particularly as we look at developing nations, is what is the state of their own infrastructure? What type of communication systems they have? I can give you a good example. Some of the work that we're doing with one of our nation partners in Haiti today, we're having to work to
When I was talking
put
to Nick,
broadband across parts of the country where they don't have it today. We've put in a government document management system, but it had to be a document management system that would work on Windows XP. Over 50% of the computers in Haiti are running Windows XP. So a lot of the solutions that I would deploy here in Austin, I cannot deploy in Haiti because of their infrastructure. So you have to begin to see that. And one of the other things we're trying to do there is we want to facilitate installing a couple of biomass plants there, not just for the common things I would use for biomass here, but one of the challenges in developing nations, and Haiti in particular, is that they have so overgrown their soil and things, and they don't have a logistic system to pull things in, that one of the byproducts of the biomass plants we want to put in there is we will actually take the leftovers from their fields, their animals, turn it into energy, but then that the leftover becomes fertilizer that will go back into the field to help keep that cycle. And I think as you're talking about the developing nations, Sri, those are some of the characteristics we have to put in place as we're training these future entrepreneurs, is to be able to look not at the most advanced market all the time, but the markets we have in the areas around us in our developing nations, because they're not the same. Supply chain, real-time supply chain logistics. So just to wrap up, a couple of following thought is there's a Gartner report that was released early this year that said over half of the companies have not even begun to think about using any real-time supply chain tools today. With that statistic, this is a great market for the entrepreneurs you're talking about. As we've seen in the United States, for example, the fact that the supply chain has become so disruptive, that's actually becoming an issue that the government is trying to get into and understand more. So it's affecting real-time companies, it's affecting consumers, it's affecting the governments, it's affecting the fact that we don't have solutions that can work in many of the companies yet. It's a perfect storm to be disruptive, transform, move together. As we saw earlier with that global connection, just looking at the real-time information on the ships, there's data there for entrepreneurs, for scientists to go work with and develop next generation solutions. So Sharif, thank you again for having me as part of this really very important program.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Thank you, Professor Dr. Talib Rafael, for joining today's sessions. I know that you were in COP26, and can you hear me? Professor Talib, can you hear me?
Can't hear you.
Okay.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
We are hearing you.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We can hear you. Sorry, I think he has yes.
Okay, what I want to say is something very simple. In developing world, it's the whole setup is different from the developed world. People in the developing world are not so concerned about these issues. They have other priorities in life. Unfortunately, even climate change is not an issue. You have to be conscious and aware of that. I was in a meeting in Cyprus a few weeks ago where it was said that the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean are a hot spot. Nobody here feels about this. Nobody talks about it at all. So when you think about the developing world, you have to think in a different perspective, because people are very preoccupied with their political systems, with their democracy, corruption, jobs, and employment. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Marshall, what's your concluding remarks?
That's a great transition, what Talib just shared with us. I think, first of all, thanks for having everybody on this panel. I'm really honored to be amongst all these people. I'll just add my 2 cents. I think David really hit the nail on the head, and I also think Talib kind of talked about something that I was going to talk about, and that is, and it's in alignment with what we've heard by the other speakers. It's not enough just to have the greatest technology and data about out in Haiti, discrepancy between different types of technologies. I think at the heart of it is what we just heard from Talib, which has to do with who are you dealing with, who is dealing with these supply chains, and what do they need as an infrastructure at a basic level in the developing world. In the developing world, as well as in the developed world, what is needed is information, and information needs transparency. If you lie about your information, you're not going to get the results you think you're going to get. Even if you are a dictator and you think you're getting away with murder, that's not going to happen. You may do it for a while, but it's not going to be forever. The point is, if you're going to have a sustainable supply chain, you have to have an infrastructure that allows you to communicate truth, information, data that is transparent and viable, so that people know where they are on the data, on the supply chain map that we see before. And one of the things that I think that was brought up is that, yes, right now, this COVID process, we're seeing a huge shift in the world, especially in the developing world, where people are starting to wake up and see that, you know, there are opportunities not just with waste, but also with supply chain technology that allows them to actually innovate, create opportunities, and improve their quality of life around the world. So I want to thank everybody for being on this panel. And if you want to reach out to me, get me on my LinkedIn account. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Raymond, yes, Mr. Raymond. Yes.
There we go. Okay. Thank you very much for once again, for the invitation, Sharif. And very, very interested to hear everybody's remarks today. Very interesting, this whole idea of the perfect storm which we find ourselves in. I think we are possibly in the eye of it right now. I normally try to remain as optimistic as possible, but I am aware that there are furious forces out there trying to do whatever it is that they want to do. So I think it's very the education that this platform provides is completely invaluable. With respect to entrepreneurs that might be looking to fulfill a need or solve a problem, what I've found works the best for us, or has worked the best for us, is definition of purpose. I mean, from your purpose, you're able to develop your culture, using people's skills within that culture to create better solutions. One tool which we find really good is the Ikigai Mandala, which sort of breaks things down into vocation, profession, I think it's passion, or what I like to call purpose, and the mission of the company. This is a really good. It's made up of a series of different wheels, and of course we know that if a wheel is flat along any particular side, you're going to have a bumpy ride. So the idea is to try and maintain as much balance as you can, and of course this is where culture comes in, to be able to guide, use your purpose as your compass, so that you always know where you're going. I totally agree with Mr. Talib. It's very, very difficult to look at the stars when you keep banging your head on the ceiling. So if you are an entrepreneur and you're looking or you are working within economically challenged areas with differently rich people, it's a very, very good place to start is solving the very, very basic problems which needn't even exist in this moment in time. Thank you very much, and purpose, peace, and power, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martley.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Going to have to bounce off very shortly and everything. I'll actually be doing Thanksgiving on tomorrow, so I don't know whether we're having a show or not, but I'll try to join you on Friday. But definitely some great conversation and some very powerful things that have been discussed. So I look forward to seeing you again very shortly on either Friday or definitely on next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martley. Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. I was reminded of an idea regarding COVID and the vaccines when it was mentioned a couple of times throughout this episode. United Nations, the European Union, the big complex that is the USA managed to pool its resources, its influence, its power, its ingenuity to roll something out intended for pretty much every person on Earth, and to roll it out in a sector of medicine, namely vaccines and vaccinology, that usually takes a very long time traditionally. It was fast-tracked, which is a display of tremendous power, influence, lobbying, public relations, and so on, the likes of which I can barely fathom to get my head around. It's a tremendous level of power, both over and veiled. The invisible hand, invisible handism, which stands in opposition to visibility and transparency, obviously, the clue being in the name, invisible hand. So if they can manage all that with one thing, namely the COVID vaccines, then surely they could have managed it with other topics, issues, moral emergencies, urgent supplies. They have the power to stop wars, and they have stoked the fires for all kinds of conflicts. So why do they suddenly care about our welfare now all of a sudden? So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Sharif. Good episode.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Professor Talib, can you hear me? What's your concluding remarks? And besides that, I want to know, what is the outcome of COP26, especially from your point of view? What actually the developing nations will get from this COP26, and how actually developed nation will play a role for solving this climate change?
There is something in common between the COVID and the climate change, because they both defy borders. They both require an international response to it. The name of the game is not how good each country is doing it on its own. The name of the game is how good we are incorporated with each other and making a unified position. That's the idea. So when Mr. Adam talks about COVID and vaccination, I have to say it shouldn't turn to a game that those that have it, those that don't have it, because that's what vaccination is about now. Some people can afford it, some people cannot afford it anymore. And the world needs to come together, definitely. The poor countries of the world cannot do it on their own. No country can do it on its own, no matter how powerful it is, let alone small countries. Thank you so much, Sherry, for all your efforts.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining today's session. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Mr. Marshalls, Mr. Raymonds, and Mr. Adam, and Professor Talib. After a long time, you joined today's session. I'm really happy. So hopefully all of your contribution will change this world in an effective way. And World Talent Economy Forum always be looking for talented people. Yes, we will train the talented people with the help of all of the talented speakers. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care. Thank you, Professor Talib, and everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Sharif. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.